Back in my early 20s, my best friend and I went through a phase of going on road trips every other weekend. One time, we planned on driving all the way to San Francisco with a few stops in between. On the first day, about 4 hours into the drive, we were traveling along I-70 in Colorado, nearing the state line around 8 p.m. We pulled over at a gas station. While I was fueling up, I noticed two other girls also pumping gas. They looked around the same age as us, possibly on a road trip like we were. However, just behind them at another pump was a guy who appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s. The girls couldn't see him, but he was staring at them with a blank expression, his eyes darting back and forth between them. It was really creepy. After a while, the guy returned to his car, and I went inside the gas station to grab some snacks for our night drive to Salt Lake City. When I walked back out of the gas station, the girls were just leaving in their car. I looked around for the creepy guy and saw him staring at the girl's car again. Suddenly, he jumped into his truck and sped off in the same direction as the girls. I thought, no way, if that happened to me and my friend, I'd want someone to have our back too, even if it was just to trail us while dialing 911. By the time I caught up with them, the guy was tailgating their car with his high beams on, flashing his lights every so often as if he was trying to get them to pull over. Then, right in front of me, he sped up around the side of the girl's car, leaning over in his seat to shout at them. The girl started to pull over, and I thought, oh God, no, don't do it, but the guy in the truck just passed them and kept going, maybe because he saw me trailing him. We continued our drive, shaken but safe. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but we couldn't shake the eerie feeling from that encounter. It was a stark reminder to always stay vigilant on the road. Before we get into this next story, I want to take a moment to talk about the sponsor for today's video. Aura is an all-in-one digital security service providing continuous monitoring of your personal data, along with quick resolutions to help you resolve any potential threats. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives. It's all out there. This affects nearly 1/3 of all U.S. citizens, and continues to affect 15 million U.S. citizens every single year, costing billions of dollars. That's why I've been using Aura. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, or other sensitive information. I don't know if you saw this, but AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records, both existing and former customers, were released on the dark web. They recommend those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Well, Aura does all this for me, and best of all, I don't have to download several different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised in the AT&T data breach, I wouldn't worry, because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work of keeping me safe. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to https://aura.com/thecurse to start your 2-week free trial, also linked below in the description. I strongly suggest everyone to try it out and keep your identity secure. Don't get cursed. Use Aura and save yourself. In a little village up in the Scottish Highlands, when I say tiny, I mean tiny. Accounting for the 2 farms with their big old farmers' houses, there were 5 homes, a farm shop, and a pub. That's it. At the edge of the village was a bus stop, which was my portal to civilization for the first 17 years of my life. Life was the same for all the kids in the surrounding villages too. We had nothing to do at home, and only one notoriously unreliable bus service to get us out of our various little hamlets. When I reached my mid-teens, owning a car became an option. The prospect of getting my hands on one seemed like my golden ticket to freedom. I could go anywhere, do anything and get out of my drab little village for days at a time. All I needed was a bit of petrol money. I worked hard, saving every penny I could, putting it all towards a little 3-door hatchback I had spotted in the local paper. Then, on my 17th birthday, my dad revealed he had already put a deposit down on it. All I had to do was pay off the rest with my own money, and I would own the car. My friends were almost as happy as I was about the new car. After all, they were going to benefit from my newfound mobility too. We drove up to Inverness for the day, went to Domino's, and tried getting served in a few of the pubs there. It was a good laugh, but hardly the big city. It was only a few hours' drive there and back. We started eyeing up a more challenging destination, somewhere none of us had ever been, as far from home as my car could take us. After some discussion, we decided on London. None of us had ever been to London before. As much as Edinburgh was the center of our world, London seemed like the center of the universe. It was gearing up to be a real lads on tour kind of trip. We decided to save up for a few months, then drive down in the summer to make the most of the daylight and good weather. It took us quite a while to plan such a big journey. It felt like we were going to star in our own Lord of the Rings spin-off. When the time came to pack up the car and hit the road, we could barely contain our excitement. We thought it would be the road trip that would define our young lives, something that would bridge the gap from boyhood to adulthood. In a way, that's exactly what it was. Even though we wouldn't actually make it to London, none of us would ever be the same again. We planned on completing the 10-hour drive in 2 legs, 1 5-hour drive down to Blackpool, where we'd sleep overnight in a hotel. Then the next day, we'd make the next 5 hours or so down to London. We picked out a Travelodge on the edge of town to get ourselves a few rooms. The drive down was easy enough, but when we got there, we realized that we had made a very silly mistake. Instead of actually booking the rooms and paying in advance, we thought we could just show up at our leisure. The nice lady at the front desk apologized and told us that they were all booked up. We were less than pleased with ourselves. We drove around a bit more, hoping to find somewhere with a free room or two, but to our absolute horror, everywhere was booked up for the night. In the end, we had to accept that we had to either keep driving, which was not an option because I was completely exhausted, or try our best to get some sleep in the car after parking somewhere safe and discreet. That's how we ended up in the car park of a service station, leaning the seats back and settling in for a few hours of terrible sleep before we got back on the road to London. I'm not sure how long later, but I woke up to one of my mates, Alistair, tapping me on the shoulder, saying he needed to go to the toilet. Given that it was a 3-door, that meant I needed to get out of the car and pull the seat forward so Ali had room to get out. I was absolutely exhausted at this point, so I grumpily got out of the car so Ali could relieve himself in some nearby bushes. The noise woke the other lads up, who weren't pleased to have their sleep disturbed. I sat on the edge of my driver's seat, feet on the concrete outside, watching Ali walking off into a dark corner of the car park. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself it would all be worth it once we were raising hell among the unsuspecting locals. Then, seconds later, I heard the bushes rustling and looked up to see Ali bursting out of them, running full pelt back to the car. Before I could say anything, Ali was jabbering, "Start the car, start the car." Start the car while basically shoving me out of the way to clamber into the back seat again. This had everyone in the car asking what his problem was, but he ignored them, focusing on telling me we needed to get moving quickly. I worked out that whatever had him so freaked out was in the bushes he had walked into to take a pee. I remember turning back around to look at the bushes and seeing the shape of a person suddenly walk into the orange lamplight. I could see it was a bloke, but other than that, I couldn't make out much detail. What I could see was that this bloke was power walking over to our car, not in a way that suggested he was going to be calm or polite about his encounter with Ali. God knows what had happened, but it obviously wasn't good. I know it sounds selfish, but the first thing that went through my mind was, he's going to damage my car. Ali was in the back seat by that point, so if the random bloke had plans for violence, it was either me or my car that was going to get it. That had me twisting the key into the ignition like a madman. As soon as I got a decent rev going, I put my foot down and we zoomed out of the car park back onto the main road. Once we appeared to be safe, a lot of us were basically screeching at Ali to tell us how he'd managed to piss someone off in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of the night. Ali was a bit of a joker back then, still is to be honest, and he had a way of rubbing people the wrong way. He just couldn't help himself, almost like he kept all his smart comments bottled up until he exploded. He was always getting us in trouble back home, so naturally our first assumption was that he had pulled a classic Ali and gotten us chased away from our sleeping spot. He just about blew his top at the accusation, completely denied being rude to anyone, and told everyone to shut up so he could explain what had happened. When he did, we actually thought he was lying to us, that it was a way of getting out of the doghouse so he wouldn't start the trip in everyone's bad books. But then we made him swear on his mom's life, and he did, telling us again, boys, I swear to God, I think I just witnessed a murder. It was about 3 a.m. at that point, on a quiet stretch of dual carriageway somewhere between Manchester and Liverpool, and we were all listening as Ali started telling us his story. He said he walked into the bushes right out of sight of the car park for some privacy, and just as he was about to relieve himself, he heard something not too far away from him. Not wanting to start peeing until he knew he was alone, Ali said he crept through the bushes a bit more, trying to work out what and where the sound was. He said it sounded like someone was punching a pillow, like muted strikes lined up with someone making soft grunting noises. If your mind is building an unsavory image of what that noise could be, you and Ali think alike, because he too thought he was about to catch 2 people playing a sneaky game. At least that was his excuse for why he was so curious and why he went skulking through the bushes in the middle of the night. Instead of finding 2 wrongdoers engaged in hanky-panky, he saw what he could only describe as a bloke kneeling over another, looking like he was slamming his fist down onto the other one's chest. The bloke taking it was lying on the grass verge, not making a sound. That's when Ali realized that the bloke wasn't just hitting the other one with his fist, he had a knife in his hand. He wasn't punching him, he was stabbing him. When he realized what he was looking at, Ali said he must have made a noise, either a gasp or a rustle of the bushes. The bloke heard it, turned towards Ali, and that was Ali's cue to come running back through the bushes into the lights of the car park. Ali finished his horror story, and we were still in a state of disbelief. Not because we didn't believe him, but because we didn't want to believe him. His tone of voice, the way he was telling the story, everything made me think he was telling the truth. Ali was a brave lad, I suppose you had to be with a mouth like his. To see him so frightened wasn't something we thought he could fake. We were still trying to pick apart his story, poke holes in it, or get him to admit he was exaggerating, but he wouldn't. He swore blind that what he saw was true, and that we needed to get to a police station. Right as he said that about telling the police, I looked up into my rearview mirror to see a pair of headlights coming up really fast on my bumper. I pulled into the left-hand lane, thinking it was just some boy racer who'd come tearing past us, but they matched my speed exactly and stayed right behind us. I had all kinds of stuff running through my mind, but mostly I was thinking about how Ali had told us the stabber had seen his face. We were the only car in the car park. We had even turned the interior light on for a second so Ali could climb back into the car. There was a very high chance that he could have seen my car and memorized the registration plate. I told the lads about the car that was following us, and all of a sudden, the atmosphere in the car shifted from anxious to terrified. Ali told me to just pull over and let them pass, but we didn't know who it was behind us, and we didn't know who it was behind us, and we didn't want to take the chance that it was the stabber. The last thing we wanted to do was give him another chance to finish off what he had started back at the service station. At first, I thought maybe they were just trying to intimidate us, to make sure we didn't stop or something. But then, they started speeding up, getting really close behind me, almost like they were trying to ram me off the road. I put my foot down, my little car doing everything it could to keep ahead of them. We were flying down that road, doing everything we could to get away from them. Every so often I'd glance in the rearview mirror, hoping to see the headlights shrinking into the distance. They kept getting closer and closer, almost close enough to see the whites of their eyes. My heart was pounding in my chest, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. I was trying to think of anything I could do to shake them off our tail. Then, I remembered something my dad had told me once. He said, if you ever get in a situation like this, where someone is following you, the best thing you can do is head for the nearest police station. It was our only shot, so I floored it, making a beeline for the nearest town. I don't know how we did it, but somehow we managed to lose them in the maze of streets. We parked up outside a police station and ran inside, breathless and scared out of our wits. The officers on duty took one look at us and knew something was wrong. We spilled out the whole story, from the service station to the chase, and they took it seriously, really seriously. They sent out patrols to look for the car that had been following us, and they took Ali's statement about what he had seen. The next few hours were a blur. We were in and out of the police station, talking to officers, trying to remember every detail. The police assured us they would investigate and keep us updated. We never found out what happened to the bloke in the bushes or who was in the car that chased us, but the whole experience shook us to our cores. It was supposed to be the road trip that defined our youth, and in a way it did, but not in the way we had hoped. We never made it to London. After everything that happened, we just wanted to get home and forget about it. The journey back was somber, each of us lost in our thoughts, the thrill of adventure replaced by a sense of dread and relief that we had made it out alive. We never spoke about it much after that, not because we wanted to forget, but because we didn't need to. It was a shared experience that bonded us in a way nothing else could. It was the kind of thing that changed you, made you see the world differently. We were no longer the naive boys who set off on a road trip. We had seen a darker side of life, one that we never wanted to encounter again. And as for Ali, he was never quite the same. He still had his cheeky grin and quick wit, but there was a seriousness to him that hadn't been there before. We all grew up a little that night, and in the end, that was our rite of passage, our bridge from boyhood to adulthood. I used to go to Arizona State, so whenever I could, I'd drive back to San Diego to see family and friends. It was a solid 5.5-hour drive, but sometimes I'd get so homesick that I drove home on a Friday and be back home late on Sunday. The point is, I used to spend a lot of time driving at night. One week, my mom called me with some pretty bad news. My grandpa was sick, really sick, and had to be rushed to the hospital for treatment. She wanted to know if I could visit him, with the implication being that it might be my very last chance to see him. The call came at like 11:30 at night, so I quickly packed my bags, told my roommate where I was going and how long I'd be, then started the night drive back to California. A few hours later, I'm driving through dry, dusty rural Nevada when I decided to take one of my usual stops that I take when driving that route. For clarity's sake, it was just an hour or so before the California border, and I'm still very familiar with that particular stop because I used to perform the same little ritual every time I was getting ready to enter California. Since I was often driving alone a lot in Arizona, I used to conceal carry at the time. I had my extended permit, which allowed concealed carry through several states except, of course, California. So I park my car and start disassembling and putting away my gun to be in compliance with California gun laws. When I'm done doing that, I step out to go to the restroom and grab some coffee before I go out on the road again. What I didn't know was that someone had managed to get close to my truck and was hiding along the passenger side. When I walked past them, whoever it was grabbed me from behind and I let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream I could possibly muster, kind of to alert anyone nearby, but mainly because I realized there was basically no one else around to see what was going on. I did all I could. I fought and tried to buck the guy off of me, but I wasn't doing very well. I tried kicking back at him, but he countered by lifting me off the ground where I couldn't get him. Then I tried to break through the grip his arms had on me, but that just made him bend me over with him still behind me. I'm not sure how long I was screaming and fighting, but when I heard tires screech, my fear ramped up like 1,000 times. I figured the guy had a partner, and I was about to be tossed into the back of a truck or something, and I'd never be seen again. In reality, it was a Toyota Corolla full of local teenagers. God knows why they were at that gas station so late, but I thank God that they were, because I think they literally saved my life that night. The teens jumped out and ran towards us, and the guy who grabbed me took off. 2 of the kids chased him through the desert beyond the gas station on foot, and the driver and the other kid made sure I was all right. They waited with me until the cops arrived, and I could tell them what happened. They even brought me a cup of coffee and let me bum a smoke. I didn't even smoke, I just felt like I needed one to calm myself down. For years afterward, I used to send each of these guys thank you texts on the anniversary of my near miss, and if I hadn't lost the phone their numbers were saved on, I'd still do it. As much as those kids decided to be heroes that night, there are just as many people in the world who would have turned a blind eye and pretended they didn't see it, and I thank God that it wasn't one of those kinds of people who just so happened to pull into the parking lot when I needed them most. On the night of May 22nd, 1978, a couple was driving through the Nevada desert on their way to California. They had been on the road for several hours and decided to take a break at a rest stop. As they were getting out of their car, they noticed a strange light in the sky. The light seemed to be following them and getting closer. They got back into their car and started to drive away, but the light continued to follow them. Suddenly, the car's engine died, and they were stranded in the middle of the desert. The light descended, and they saw a large, saucer-shaped object hovering above them. The couple tried to restart the car, but it wouldn't budge. They were terrified and didn't know what to do. Then, a beam of light shot out from the object, and they were lifted into the air. The next thing they knew, they were inside the object, surrounded by strange beings. The beings communicated with them telepathically, telling them they were from another planet and meant no harm. The couple was subjected to a series of medical tests and then returned to their car. The engine started, and they drove away, shaken but unharmed. They never spoke of the incident again, fearing they would be labeled as crazy. Back in my early 20s, my best friend and I went through a phase of going on road trips every other weekend. This one time, we planned on driving all the way to San Francisco with a few stops in between. On the first day, we were about 4 hours into the drive, going along I-70 in Colorado, coming up on the state line around 8 p.m. We pulled over at a gas station, and while I was fueling up, I noticed these other two girls pumping gas. They looked around the same age as us, like they could have been on a road trip just like we were. Just behind them was a man who seemed to be watching them closely. As we got back on the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that guy. I mentioned it to my friend, but she just laughed it off, saying I was being paranoid. We drove for another hour or so before deciding to pull over at a rest stop to get some sleep. We parked in a well-lit area near the restrooms, locked the doors, and tried to get some rest. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by a loud banging on the window. My friend woke up too, and we saw the same guy from the gas station standing outside our car. He was yelling and demanding that we open the door. Terrified, we started the car and sped off, not looking back. We drove through the night, adrenaline keeping us awake. By the time we felt safe enough to stop, the sun was rising. We pulled into a busy diner, exhausted and shaken. Inside, we told the waitress what had happened, and she called the police for us. An officer came by, took our statement, and reassured us that they would look into it. We stayed at the diner for a few hours, trying to calm down and get some food in our systems. After that, we decided to cut our trip short and head back home. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but we were both on edge the entire time. It wasn't the road trip we had envisioned, but we were grateful to be safe. That experience taught us to always trust our instincts and be aware of our surroundings. On May 18, 1935, George and Laura Lorius joined their friends Albert and Tilly Haberer on a cross-country road trip from their home in southern Illinois. The group planned to drive across 2,000 miles of plains and desert, finally finishing on the coast of California. By May 21st, they arrived in the small town of Vaughn, New Mexico. After getting out of George Lorius's Nash sedan, the two couples checked into the Vaughn Hotel and sent several postcards to friends and family. They had a small dinner at a local diner and then retired to their rooms for the night, planning to continue west the following morning. In their postcards, the group seemed to be in high spirits and reported nothing unusual during their recent drive. However, after the couples continued driving west on the morning of May 22nd, neither was ever heard from again. On the morning of May 26th, the Lorius' car was found abandoned in the business district of Dallas, Texas. The vehicle's keys were still in the ignition, the gas tank was full, and numerous postcards lay in the passenger seat, but there was no sign of any of the Illinois road trippers. Gas station receipts confirmed that Mr. Lorius had purchased fuel in Socorro on May 23rd, but after that, their fate was anyone's guess. The following week, the couple's families were notified of their disappearance, and an official investigation was launched. Police initially believed that the absence of $400 worth of travelers' checks indicated a violent robbery. However, investigators soon discovered that the couple's car had been involved in a minor accident shortly after arriving in Socorro. Since the accident could have angered someone enough to harm the road trippers, police began questioning the witnesses to the crash. Instead of describing the vehicle as containing two middle-aged couples, witnesses stated that the lone occupant was a young man with dark-colored hair. Detectives managed to track the vehicle from the scene of the accident to a small local repair shop. Mechanics had changed the tire on the vehicle and completed other minor repairs, and the driver had paid with one of George Lorius's traveler's checks. Detectives followed the trail of cash checks to a motel in El Paso and then to Dallas, where the vehicle was found abandoned on May 26th. The investigation stalled until June 29th, when a report came in about a small desert bushfire on the outskirts of Albuquerque. The fire department discovered a piece of burning luggage inside with the smoldering belongings of George and Laura Lorius. With the person responsible for the couple's disappearance still actively disposing of their belongings, law enforcement rushed into action, hoping the couples might still be recovered alive. The FBI headed up a multi-agency task force that searched rivers, lakes, mine shafts, wells, and numerous spots around the desert. Despite the extensive search, not a trace of the missing couples could be found. Unable to apprehend the suspect, detectives were diverted to other investigations, and the case eventually went cold. However, as recently as 2010, the case files have been revisited by various state police officers, each hoping for a flash of inspiration. According to one such officer, Agent Norman Rhodes, the case has never been officially closed. Still, the low probability of it being solved means the New Mexico State Police can rarely afford to pay it any mind. Despite the perceived difficulties of the case, Agent Rhodes has made it his personal mission to discover what happened to the 4 Illinois road trippers. Rhodes stated that perhaps his most daunting task has been trying to locate the remains of the road trippers, which are likely nothing more than desiccated bones today. It will also be no small feat to locate the couple's killer, who probably died of old age since the crime took place. Such a prospect hasn't deterred Agent Rhodes, perhaps because of the ongoing support and assistance from Laura Lorius's great niece, Barbara Ashcraft, who is desperate to see the family mystery finally solved. When pressed on her theories regarding her relative's fate, Ashcraft believes they were murdered in Vaughn, possibly in the very same cafe where they had breakfast on the morning of their disappearance. The purpose of their stop in Vaughn was so the Loriuses could visit an old friend who lived there, but it is unclear whether this friend actually met with them. In 1963, private investigator Walter Duke received a letter from a woman claiming to have witnessed the murders. The woman said she watched the 2 couples being escorted into the basement of the cafe and later heard they had been robbed, murdered, and buried in wet concrete. This tip led Barbara Ashcraft to suggest that the investigation should focus on the concrete slabs lining the site of the former Vaughn Hotel. However, Agent Norman Rhodes has another theory. After combing through stacks of reports in the State Police Records Division, Rhodes created a timeline of events and interviews that is 141 pages long. According to him, 2 postcards have convinced him that the couples left Vaughn on the morning of May 22nd with the intention of driving to Albuquerque via Santa Fe. A postcard marked May 22nd was mailed to Albuquerque, and a clerk at Albuquerque Sturgis Hotel told investigators that the couples visited her hotel that afternoon to ask about renting rooms. Rhodes believes the couples rented one of the smaller rooms at this hotel, so each of them could take a shower and intended to travel to Gallup by nightfall. Shortly after leaving town, they had a run-in with their mysterious killer. Rhodes suggests the couples misjudged the distance to Albuquerque and ended up driving around in the dark, making them vulnerable to a predator. The couples might have misplaced their trust in someone who brutally betrayed them. Despite being spotted by witnesses, the police are no closer to identifying the man who took George Lorius's car than they were almost 90 years ago. Even if this person were identified, they would probably be unable to answer questions about something that occurred in 1935. The truth behind the disappearance of George Lorius, Laura Lorius, Albert Haberer, and Tilly Haberer might have vanished with them, leaving the mystery unsolved. These days, more and more young people are going traveling. Whether it be gap years from higher education or simply a break from the 9-to-5 grind, people are packing up their belongings into lightweight backpacks and setting off to tour Southeast Asia, namely Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Many of these travelers end up in Australia, given that it's much easier to find employment in an English-speaking country. One of these young people was named Peter Falconio. Peter Falconio hailed from West Yorkshire in the United Kingdom, but attended Brighton University with his girlfriend, Joanne Lees. After graduation, instead of settling down and getting full-time employment, the couple decided to travel the world. So on the 15th of November in the year 2000, the couple embarked on a trip to Nepal, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Australia. By the 16th of January 2001, the couple had arrived in Sydney on a working holiday visa. They worked hard for 5 long months, saving their earnings while they planned a comprehensive tour of the Australian coast. On the 25th of June, they departed on the road trip that would supposedly see them visiting Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Brisbane. On the night of Saturday, the 14th of July 2001, Falconio and Lees were driving their camper van along the Stewart Highway in northern Australia, bound for the Devil's Marbles, a wildlife conservation area. Falconio was driving with his girlfriend Joanna sat next to him in the passenger seat. The two had been aware that a car had been following them since they stopped at a roadhouse in Barrow Creek and were expecting to be overtaken. However, when the white Toyota four-wheel drive drew alongside, the driver made frenzied gestures for them to pull over immediately. Concerned, Falconio stopped the van and went to speak with the man who had pulled off the road ahead of them. The stranger explained that he had seen sparks shooting out of the van's exhaust and was worried they might be seconds away from some kind of vehicle disaster. The pair of men went to the rear of the orange camper to investigate, but Joanna Lees remained suspicious of the strange man and moved over to the driver's seat should the couple need to leave in a hurry. That's when she heard a loud bang coming from the rear of the van. She turned but only saw the strange man standing at the driver's window, a large revolver in his hand. Terrified and not knowing what else to do, Joanne Lees unlocked the doors and allowed the strange man inside their car, where he promptly tied her hands behind her back with the black cable ties that he produced from his pocket. It was horribly obvious that the man had been planning this the entire time. Lees was paralyzed with fear for a few minutes, but when the man tried to bind her feet and gag her to keep her quiet, she knew there was no turning back from that. She kicked and screamed, wailed and cried until the man finally gave up trying to restrain her completely and began dragging her back to his Toyota. Lees knew that if this man got her back to wherever he was planning on taking her, it would mean the end of her life. She would be beaten, tortured, and potentially violated. Adrenaline kicked in when Lees saw the man's dog barking at her savagely from the back seat of his vehicle. When the man went to retrieve her boyfriend's lifeless body, she ran into the bush in an attempt to escape. The man searched for her, passing nearby 3 times, but she hid before finally flagging down a passing vehicle at 12:35 a.m. This happened around 7 years ago. At the time, I worked in a job that was about a 45-minute drive away on a good day. It was a drive along little country roads to get to this isolated country town, but the pay was good and the benefits worked for me. Each night on my way home, I would drive down the main street of the town to an intersection, turning right to head home. One night I drove down to this intersection and waited for the lights to turn when suddenly and unexpectedly, I heard a knock on my passenger window. I turned to see 2 men staring at me through the window of their car, both looking kind of scruffy. The driver appeared really angry. Wondering what was going on, I lowered my window. The driver didn't even let me talk. "Why did you cut me off back there?" he demanded. I was confused, not having seen another car when I pulled out. "I didn't," I replied. He looked even angrier at my denial. "Yes, you did, back on Turnpike Lane. We nearly crashed," he insisted. I didn't come down Turnpike Lane. I was in the parking area at the top of the street, and turned down from another road, I explained. It must have been someone with a similar car, as my car has a very distinctive color, but I've seen a few like it around. You're a liar. I don't believe you, he said. At this point, he was getting redder and redder, and his friend chimed in. Why are you so nervous if it ain't you, he asked. Because your friend looks really angry, and I have an anxiety disorder. Plus, you two men are accosting a young woman on her own, I replied. At this point, there was a beep from behind me. We were holding up traffic. I pulled off, ignoring a roar from him. However, as I was driving, I heard a prolonged beep from behind me and saw him following me in the mirror. He must have cut into my lane to follow me. I began to become really frightened as they followed me toward a main road, wondering what I should do. A set of traffic lights turned red ahead of me, and I slowed down, panicking. I quickly locked my doors just in case, but the next thing I knew, he was pounding on my car door in an attempt to open it. I don't remember any of this, but I found out later that he had some sort of hammer in his hands. He broke my car window, attempted to pull me out of the car by my hair, and hit me once when he couldn't get me out. I think he must have knocked me out because the next thing I knew, a couple was checking my pulse and trying to stem the bleeding from a cut on my forehead. Apparently, this couple saw him pulling out past me, nearly colliding with the traffic light. In the end, he was caught. He pleaded not guilty in court, and I had to take the stand. It was proven via CCTV footage that I wasn't the driver he nearly collided with. He is still in jail, all over road rage and a case of mistaken identity. My friends and I are grunge freaks. We started out on Nirvana and Soundgarden, eventually discovering more obscure bands like Mudhoney, the Melvins, and Screaming Trees. Anyone who knows anything about grunge will tell you that it all started in Seattle, how this spontaneous new genre sprang out of the ashes of post-punk to take the world by storm, and it all happened within a few square miles. So naturally, Seattle is like a mecca for grunge fans, and after years of planning and false commitments, we finally got our stuff together and went on a road trip to our sacred city. That's how we ended up on the Wyoming interstate. We were just driving along, singing along to Alice in Chains songs when the next thing I know, I can see red and blue flashes in my rearview mirror. My buddies in the back seat spin around, seeing the same thing I did, an unmarked vehicle with one of those attachable emergency lights on the top. As I start to pull over, I'm wondering where this cop car came from. We were on this long stretch of open road and could see for miles around us. It was pretty unnerving that it had managed to just creep up on us like that. But you know how it is, traffic cops tend to stay out of sight in little rest areas or whatever, their speedometers at the ready. I was well within the speed limit, but I was still worried. I'd be lying if I said we didn't have anything on us that we shouldn't have, but that was all buried in our bags in the trunk, and even then, it wasn't exactly enough to charge us with. So I just got my driver's license ready on my lap and kept my hands at 10 and 2 like a good little citizen. The cop turned off his lights and then got out of the unmarked car, walking along the dusty road towards us. He was wearing civilian clothes, a baseball cap, aviator sunglasses, and a checkered shirt, but I could clearly see the utility belt and badge he was wearing. When he knocked on my window, I promptly rolled it down, smiling. "Good afternoon, officer. I'm no bootlicker, but I'm not going to give this guy an excuse to ruin our road trip. What follows probably isn't exactly what was said that day, but it's the best I can remember. Afternoon, officer. How can I help you?" "Driver's license and registration," he demanded curtly. Sure thing, I took one hand off the steering wheel and handed him my license. He took a long, careful look first at my license, then at me. Detroit. He finally said dismissively. You're a long way from home, son. What's your business in Wyoming? We're heading to Seattle, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, just passing through. The cop seemed to mull this over for a moment, then handed back my license without another word. I started to feel a little relieved until he spoke again. Mind if I take a look in your trunk? My heart sank. I glanced at my friends, who were all equally wide-eyed and anxious. Saying no wasn't really an option, not without raising suspicion, so I nodded and popped the trunk. The officer walked to the back of the car, and we could hear him rummaging through our stuff. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find anything. After what felt like an eternity, he returned to my window, a small smile on his face. Looks like you're clean. Sorry for the trouble, just doing my job. I nodded, forcing a smile. No problem, officer. Have a good day. He tipped his hat and walked back to his car. We watched as he drove off, disappearing into the distance. As soon as he was out of sight, we all let out a collective sigh of relief. That was close, one of my friends muttered. Too close, I agreed. We sat there for a few minutes, letting the adrenaline fade before starting the car and continuing on our way. The rest of the trip was thankfully uneventful. We made it to Seattle and spent a few days visiting all the iconic grunge spots, Sub Pop Records, the Central Saloon, and of course, Kurt Cobain's old house. It was everything we'd hoped for and more. But that close call in Wyoming stayed with us, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. Last winter, I was driving down the freeway at night between the suburbs of a large metropolitan area. There were plenty of cars around, but it was around midnight, and it had been snowing. I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder of the freeway with a guy standing next to it, clearly needing some assistance. I saw him as I was driving past, but since it was late at night and cold, I figured I might as well take the next exit, loop around, and see if the guy still needed help. I got there and found a middle-aged, working-class guy standing outside his pickup. He was wearing blue overalls, slender, slightly balding, and gave off a weird vibe that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He said he was having car troubles, was from about 2 hours out of town, and that his alternator was shot and his battery needed a boost. Having owned a car with a shot alternator, I knew that when the battery dies, you need to boost it for a little while to get things running again. I told him it was no problem, commiserated with him for a minute, and popped my hood. He said he was going to grab his cables. When he came back, I noticed he had some sort of concealed metal object in his hand. I saw it for just a brief moment. It wasn't a knife, but it was metal and a little shorter than the length of his hand, and he was clearly trying to conceal it from my view. This all happened so fast, and I was immediately on high alert. I saw him bringing the cables to me so that I could hook up my battery. I instantly took a step back to put some distance between us and told him he could hook up my battery, and I'd wait in the car, all while being in an instantaneous full fight or flight mode, ready to lock and attack if he lunged at me. He didn't lunge and started connecting the cables to my battery. As I sat in my car, I started to wonder if I was imagining things. Maybe it was just something bundled in with the cables that he had in his hand. Perhaps I misread the situation as dangerous. After a few minutes, he went to start his car, shouted that it wasn't working, and then walked back towards my car. While he waited in front of my car, he put his head back under the hood to fiddle with the cables. All the while I watched him intently to make sure he didn't come to the car window because I was still spooked. He shouted again that it wasn't working and asked me to come take a look. I opened my window a bit and casually told him not to worry and that it was probably going to take some time. Luckily, I could just barely see my battery in the dark through the gap under the propped hood of my car. I saw him fiddle with the cables and shout again that it wasn't working and for me to come out. Then I saw him slip the metal object I had seen earlier and touch it to my battery terminal. Sparks shot out from where he touched it. He started yelling and jumped back. I immediately jumped out of my car and told him that something came up and I needed to go now. I honestly don't remember much of what he was trying to say as I cut him off or what exactly I said. I just remember saying that I needed to get out of there without taking my eyes off him for even half a second. I don't remember even how the cables came off my battery. Did I pull them out? Were they already off? But I slammed the hood, jumped in my car, and drove off. I still have no idea what his plan was or what he was trying to do, but I know for a fact that what I saw him do was in no way what he was telling me he was going to do. As I left him there and drove off, I was practically pinching myself trying to make heads or tails of what had just happened. I can't stress enough that the guy just gave off the weirdest vibes, like the hills have eyes kind of weird vibes. Maybe he was planning on trying to short my battery so that I was stuck there. To this day, I wonder if I encountered some sort of mass murderer who had been planning on kidnapping someone at the side of the freeway as they stopped to help. Who knows? Either way, it was strange as hell. He really spooked me, and I got away from that dude as fast as humanly possible. I still wish I had gotten a license plate or something to give to the cops, but in that moment, the only thing going through my mind was to remove myself from that situation as fast as humanly possible.